Attack on America. Dan Rather reporting from CBS News World Headquarters in New York, 4 p.m. in the East, and there's word the signal from the transponder on the black box of the hijacked plane that crashed into the Pentagon has been detected. The New York stock market will reopen Monday. It will not be open tomorrow. For the first time in history, it will have been closed for 4 straight days. First pictures of the rescue of firefighters from the World Trade Center rubble this afternoon. At least 5 firefighters were found alive in the rubble today. Secretary of State Powell today named by name Osama bin Laden as what he called a prime suspect in the terror attacks. Deputy U.S. Defense Secretary Wolfowitz today promised a, quote, sustained military operation against those responsible. He didn't say when it would start. Attorney General Ashcroft says there were 18 hijackers in the planes, aided by what he called a significant number of others. Also at this hour, the total number of those missing or dead from Tuesday's crashes is at least 5,000. President Bush has declared Friday a national day of prayer and remembrance. And despite a lifting of the official travel ban, foreign air carriers are still being turned back from the U.S. Bill Plant is covering it for us at this hour at the White House. Bill?
Dan, there's an unusual security situation here once again. The Secret Service has closed off a larger perimeter around the White House than normally exists. They've banned pedestrians from Lafayette Park across the street and from the avenue which runs between the White House grounds and the ellipse to the south. The Secret Service says that this is going to be perhaps going on for a while. They may lift it from time to time. They may institute it. They won't say whether it's in response to a particular threat. But they clearly want us to understand that conditions around here are going to be different. The president today, Dan, has moved on several fronts. First, to consolidate his position with other world leaders and other nations, gaining support for whatever action he eventually decides to take, suggesting that he not only wants the moral and political support of some of those countries, but possibly also much more concrete kinds of support, overflight rights, perhaps even participation in some cases. He's also moved to comfort the victims and to praise the rescuers going to a hospital nearby here in Washington, D.C. today, following a visit yesterday to the Pentagon. And as you know, he heads to New York City tomorrow. And Mr. Clinton is meeting at this hour, Mr. Bush, is meeting at this hour with the members of Congress from the New York and Washington, D.C. areas, the people whose constituents are most affected by this terrible tragedy. Dan?
Bill Plant, live at the White House. President Bush has called this the first war of the 21st century, the war against terrorism. Direct quote from the president. Direct quote from the U.S. Secretary of State, Colin Powell, says Osama bin Laden is a, quote, prime suspect as a major mover in the events that have resulted in so much tragedy in the United States. Standard & Poor's says that it expects the events of this week to tip the U.S. economy into a recession. We're going to discuss that coming up in the next half hour. And a spokesman for the insurance industry who was just here at CBS News said he would expect, yes, that's a strong possibility, but pointed out that after the disaster and the devastation of Hurricane Andrew in Florida in the early 1990s, that the South Florida economy came roaring back, partly because so many insurance dollars and other money was pumped into reconstruction and to rebuilding the area. We have new pictures just in. Search early this morning underneath the World Trade Center. Now, with hand axes, picks, these brave men are down in there looking, number one, for anyone who might conceivably be alive. Keeping in mind that at least 5 firemen were found alive in other places in debris this morning. Secondly, looking for bodies. Let's listen for a moment because you can hear their footsteps. Now, folks, you talk about an eerie place. I was actually underneath the collapsed World Trade Center, down there with their lights, an incredibly oppressive, stifling place, not just from heat, and there is considerable heat down there, but from the dust and the other conditions. Anthony Mason, our CBS News business correspondent, is with us here and joining us. Anthony, we may want to discuss it in some detail, but put in perspective for us this talk now of, well, yes, this is going to tip us over into at least a short recession.
Dan, there are two schools of thought at work right now. I mean, most economists do believe this is probably going to push us into a recession, at least for the short term. But as you mentioned, there's a growing sentiment that that the amount of the increase in government spending, the increase in money for construction in Washington and here in New York City may well put money into the economy, get us going again. I've talked to economists today who say they think we'll probably go into a recession, but we may well come roaring out of it. We're going to have a combination going here of tax cuts, which of course are already in the pipeline and many people have already received, but on top of that there's going to be increased government spending. So you may have two actions going that help give impetus to the economy. So now, mind you, as I say, there are two schools of thought here. There are people who also believe this is really going to cause us some major problems.
Well, so you sort of take your pick. But in addition to a lot of federal disaster funds will be coming into New York City, not to mention other federal money, there will be all this insurance money. Right. And that will be considerable because the representative of the insurance industry, Mr. Ulrich, just said he thought it would be at or near the $15 billion record insurance payout, that record set by Hurricane Andrew.
You're going to have increased defense spending. You're going to have increased construction spending in Lower Manhattan, in Washington. All of these are going to pump a lot of money into the economy. You've got tax cuts at work already. You add all those things together, there are some economists who now believe that's going to go a long way to bringing us to a recovery after we probably go into a short recession.
How worried should I or any other citizen be about the fact that the stock markets in New York will remain closed tomorrow for the fourth consecutive day? They will not reopen until Monday.
I don't think you should be concerned. They've been debating this now for days, and I think the conclusion they came to was, why try to rush something? They want to test all of the phone lines, all of what they call the interconnectivity of the system. They're going to do it on Saturday. They're going to have a test run of the markets. We're told that the stock market building for the New York Stock Exchange itself has not been damaged. The American Stock Exchange has some damage, and they're probably going to operate from the New York Stock Exchange on Monday. NASDAQ's technical operations aren't actually even in Lower Manhattan, so they're secure. But they want to make sure this operation works. They're also saying, you know, we want to give our firms time, you know, to find their employees down here. One piece of good news, Dan, we've been talking about Morgan Stanley Dean Witter, who is the major tenant of the World Trade Center with 3,500 employees. They're reporting today that of those 3,500 employees, they have now located all but 50. So that's very good news.
What are the chances, indeed it is, what are the chances that early Monday, in fact all day Monday, will be a pretty wild up and down ride on the stock markets?
I think it's going to be very interesting. I mean, a lot of people say, you know, there's really no precedent for this. I think we're going to take a hit at first, but a lot of people seem to think that we're going to bounce back. We've had time to absorb the shock. If this had happened if the markets had been open Tuesday, if the attack hadn't happened before they opened, we would have plunged. The market would have plunged. But we've had 5 days to absorb this shock. I don't think it's going to be as bad next week as it could have been.
Well, it'll be Monday morning before we know. Anthony Mason, thanks. Ed Bradley, what else do we know about this report? In fact, I would say is a major headline of the hour, that they're hearing noises from the sounds from the transponder of the plane that hit the Pentagon.
Well, it sends out a signal, Dan, and if they found that signal, that means they're a step closer to being able to find what's called the black box in these planes. Now, normally when a plane crashes, the black box will tell you what happened. Well, we know what happened here, but it will give them some more clues as to just what happened during the course of the takeover of those planes. You remember on some of those planes, the transponders were turned off, so they couldn't tell where they were. If it also we find intact cockpit voice recordings, they will be able to physically hear exactly what happened in the cockpit. So it will add more clues to them. But I think this is a little different situation than you have in a normal plane crash, because in a normal plane crash, the FAA is trying to determine why the plane crashed. In this case, we know why the plane crashed.
Well, keep us posted, Ed. In the meantime, we go live to Lower Manhattan, and our friend and now head of the American Red Cross, Dr. Bernadine Healy. Doctor, good to see you again. Tell us what you think are the most important things for us to know about what's happening today as this heartbreaking search for some people still alive and for bodies goes on.
Well, Dan, the most important thing is how America pulls together. I mean, you can see it here, you can see it across this country, and I think we're proud. The American Red Cross is proud to be able to be part of this effort and be part of America's community, the civilian population that can help in this effort.
What's the situation with the blood supply,
care.
I'm sorry, Doctor. What is the situation with the blood supply?
We have had an enormous outpouring across the country with regard to the blood supply. Right now we have a 5-day supply of blood, which is very good, but with the uncertainty of the situation and the fact that we are on high alert, we are continuing to collect blood, and any blood that is not used will be frozen for a strategic disaster reserve.
Doctor, I'm very sorry. I did not mean to interrupt you, and if you hadn't finished your previous thought...
That's all right. No, Dan. You know, we're all working together here.
Well, the communication is not ideal, but I think you were making a point that people are beginning to come together now and form a united purpose.
And, you know, we saw that, Dan, right away. You know, when we saw that second plane hit, we were watching this unfold, of course, and activated our Disaster Operations Center in Washington and mobilized all of our chapters across the country. And, of course, New York got mobilized right away, and we had the problem with the Pentagon. And what was clear immediately is that people started to come pouring in, volunteers, people who wanted to give blood, people who wanted to donate money, the support at every level, the family, the corporations. I mean, this is America at its best. I mean, this is America that knows how to pull together. And, you know, at a time like this, Dan, when we are all so wounded, every one of us, you and me and everyone here, somehow the ability to be able to do something, to feel that you could make a contribution, however small it is perhaps the best way to get through this difficulty, and to somehow do it together as a team. The best medicine, Dan.
Dr. Bernadine Healy, thanks.
Thank you.
Now let's check in with Sandra Hughes at Los Angeles International Airport. Sandra?
Dan, passengers have been arriving here at Los Angeles International Airport. Things are inching back to life. It's a very slow process. The passengers are being bussed off of the airport to a remote location where they're meeting up with friends and family who are waiting to pick them up. Also, the airport is officially open, so folks are arriving here hoping to book flights and to fly out of Los Angeles International Airport. We talked to some of those people. They're parking at a remote location. Many of them... Tom, you need to stop moving. We're on live right now. Excuse me, Dan. I'm sorry about that. I'm just having a little bit of confusion here. Those folks at those remote parking lots, you know, they say things are confusing, and that's to be expected. But everyone is being very good-natured about things and really being very patient. We haven't seen a lot of movement, though, a lot of planes coming in and out. As I said, things are inching back to life. Earlier, Dan, you mentioned that report about the fact that the FAA was only allowing domestic carriers to come in to land international flights. Well, since that report, we have talked to officials at the Los Angeles airport. Earlier this morning, they accepted an Alitalia flight here from Canada. Also up in San Francisco, an Alitalia flight has been cleared for landing. And here in Los Angeles, officials are saying they are accepting any flight from anywhere. So I think there's a little bit of confusion about what the FAA guidelines are at this point, and frankly, that's to be expected. Dan?
Well, Sandra, indeed, but let me follow up for just a second. It's been my understanding for some hours now that the guidelines are that U.S. domestic carriers can come in and out of the country now, insofar as they're able to do so, and that with foreign carriers that they're allowed to come in but not fly out. What is your understanding of the policy guidelines?
That may be where the confusion lies, because what we are being told by officials here in Los Angeles is that they will accept any flights from anywhere, but they are not saying that foreign carriers are being allowed to take off. In fact, I'm not sure, but I don't think any carriers have taken off from LA yet with any passengers on board. Mostly just these are the diverted flights that are coming in. But this morning we had an Alitalia flight arrive from Canada. That's a foreign carrier from a foreign country. What is still unclear is whether they'll be able to take off. So we need to clear that up, and we'll get right back to you with that.
Well, Ed Bradley can help us here. It's my understanding, Ed, that for one thing, security, they're still trying to catch some of these bad, foul guys that want to have an opportunity to leave the country. What are the guidelines that have been passed along to us?
I think that's clear evidence that everybody's not on the same page. But according to Alison Duquette, who is the spokeswoman for the FAA, the United States is only accepting international flights by U.S. carriers. She did say that a foreign airline can leave the United States for a foreign destination, but a foreign carrier cannot come into the United States. But obviously, as she just reported, Sandra, that they came into Los Angeles, an Alitalia flight, and into San Francisco.
Well, clearly some confusion is expected in the early going. I think the main thing that should be understood about air travel today for most people, number one, while yes, officially the FAA has lifted its ban with some few exceptions, airlines can fly, airports can operate when and if they can get up and get ready to do it and do it, provided they can meet the new strict security guidelines. But it's clearly going to be a lot of confusion and require a lot of patience for some days now. Not every airport is open yet. Not all airlines are flying, not by a long shot. You may want to keep that in mind. Joining us here at our CBS News World headquarters in our studio is former police commissioner of New York City, former U.S. Marine, former high-ranking member of the Treasury Department. We could go on with your resume, Mr. Commissioner, but good to see you again.
Good to see you, Dan.
You were commissioner in 1993 when the car bomb went off at the World Trade Center. How much worse is this? It's obviously worse.
It is geometrically worse than that event. Of course, at the time, we thought it was a terrible catastrophe, and it was. 6 people lost their lives. There were 1,000 injuries. Most of the damage went down in the World Trade Center, down to the garage levels, B1 to B5. Of course, this is just unbelievable disaster, something we could not have envisioned. Quite frankly, the terrorists in 1993 tried to topple the buildings. That was their general plan. And when you saw what they tried to do at the base, it didn't work. You would assume that aircraft certainly couldn't topple those buildings.
You would assume that, and you would be wrong.
Absolutely, absolutely.
There was a lot of talk that Jim Fox, a man you and I both knew, former head of the New York FBI office, and he was at the time of that World Trade Center bombing in the early 1990s, a lot of talk that he was convinced that Saddam Hussein and Iraq had some direct connection with the bombing of the World Trade Center at that time. Did you hear that? Did you know that?
That was certainly a theory that was out there. There was nothing, and nothing, to the best of my knowledge, has come forward since then to establish that. But clearly, that was a theory. Just as a theory now is, I think, in doing any investigation, you don't necessarily want to rush to judgment. And Osama bin Laden is number one on the suspect list. But this is quite a reach from what he's done in the past. And this takes lots of planning. It takes lots of money. They've done some fairly basic, rudimentary things in the past. That's why I don't think you can exclude state-sponsored terrorism as playing some part in this. But yes, that was a theory that was out there, and I think it's still a theory that shouldn't be cast aside at this point in time.
Ms. Kelly, part of your job when you were in the government, in the Treasury Department, the Secret Service answered to you, did they not?
Yes.
Now, you no doubt read and heard the reports yesterday of White House, Justice Department, FBI officials said that when President Bush did not come directly back to Washington after the bombing from Florida, went first to Louisiana, then to Nebraska, then finally back to Washington, that it was the Secret Service who advised him to take the diversionary trips as a precaution. Does that match what you know about the Secret Service? Because it's an awful lot hard for a lot of people to believe that the Secret Service will tell the president what to do.
Well, ultimately, they can't tell the president what to do, of course, but they have great credibility. They're very, very professional. And, of course, they're singularly focused on the safety of the president. So they, I'm sure, made some very compelling arguments, and the president agreed, at least for that period of time, to go along with that. But they are so focused on that sometimes you have to ask some probing questions. They want to shut down lots of things so that the safety of the president is absolutely guaranteed. And there's a balance that has to be struck.
Safety of the president, of course, has to be absolutely guaranteed insofar as one can give any such guarantees. Now, the president plans to visit New York City tomorrow. Talk to me about the security ramifications of that.
Well, of course, the security will be very tight, but it won't be much different than the president going to outdoor events. He'll be going to hospitals, I assume, going to the site itself. There are tall buildings that will be manned. I'm not certain what they will do as far as having a military presence. That's certainly possible, some sort of air cap, which we've seen over New York in the last couple of days, may be present. But it will be, I personally think it's a prudent thing for the president to do. I think it's good for him to be here. Security, I know, will be very well done.
You were in charge when, I think it was customs agents, correct me if I'm wrong, actually foiled a terrorist attempt to go to Los Angeles International Airport, come through Canada at the time of the Millennium celebrations, come across the Canadian-U.S. border and get down to Los Angeles and do some mayhem and murder down there. What did we learn about security from that experience?
Well, I thought we would learn that we needed some additional resources on the northern border. We thought that Congress might respond because I think we're very thin on the northern border. The customs inspectors did a great job in this particular case, but there was an element of luck involved. It happened that this individual was traveling a rather circuitous route that would be traveled by tourists normally during the summer. This was in December of 1999. And because the traffic was so light, they were able to ask this individual a lot of questions, and of course they had him open the trunk of his car and found explosives. But I think that we need a lot more attention focused on both of our borders, but obviously the border between U.S. and Mexico gets a fair amount of attention. Canada gets less attention. But we know that some of the hijackers in this case came through Canada. Ahmad Rassam, the individual arrested in 1999, he came through Canada from Algeria. We need to do, in my judgment, a much better job of screening what comes into America. Trade has doubled, more than doubled, in the last 8 years, yet the resources of the Customs Service are the same. We have 150 million more visitors last year coming into the U.S. than we had 10 years ago. Almost 500 million people, yet the resources of the Immigration and Naturalization Service have remained the same. We need technology. We need x-rays. We need additional resources. And I think perhaps this will be a wake-up call in that area as well.
Ray Kelly, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Dan.
We go to Washington and Bob Orr for more information on the sounds from the transponder of the plane that crashed into the Pentagon. Bob?
Well, Dan, this could be a very important development for authorities because, you see, the black boxes will tell us exactly what the plane was doing in terms of its movements and maybe more importantly what was going on in the cockpit. Now, we are told that a local fire authority in Arlington County says they hear the sound. It's just kind of a radio sound coming from one of the black boxes. These are emergency locator transponders. If they can hear it, it means they may be getting closer, but we don't know how heavy the debris might be there, how heavy the rubble might be. If they had their druthers, I think the investigators would first like to get that cockpit voice tape, because that would maybe have the sounds, almost certainly have the sounds of the hijackers, the terrorists. We might know what the flight crew was going through. Then the second development here is there's a report floating around today that this plane maybe circled Washington, maybe went around the Capitol, even over the White House. Well, the flight data recorder will tell us once and for all exactly what was the flight path of this particular jet that hit the Pentagon. It's important to get these boxes in. So far, none of them have been recovered, although I am told they are optimistic they will also get the black boxes from the Pennsylvania crash scene. That has much less rubble, much less debris to go through, and investigators are working hard there as well, Dan.
Bob Orr, live from our bureau in Washington. Let's go up to Capitol Hill and CBS News correspondent Bob Schieffer, who's there with a man who played a key role in putting together the coalition to fight terrorism, and when this is now described sustained military operation begins, this senator will be right in the center of all that. Bob?
And, of course, that's Joe Biden, Dan, who is the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And just by coincidence, when he finishes talking here with us, he is going to meet with the chief of the Pakistani Secret Service, who is in this country right now, has been conferring at the State Department. Of course, one of the things we've been talking about all day is the United States is calling on Pakistan to cooperate and believes that Pakistan will be key in getting to the bottom of all this and getting to Osama bin Laden, who we believe is in neighboring Afghanistan at this time. Chairman Biden, this is going to be a difficult thing for Pakistan, though, isn't it?
Well, it's a difficult thing, Bob, but they got to choose. I mean, this is no longer in the sidelines. They're either with us or against us, and it's a tough spot, but it's the spot they're in. And I have spoken with the Secretary of State. I've spoken with Mr. Armitage, the number 2 guy over there, and I'll be speaking with Mr. Mahmoud Ahmad, and he is the head of their ISI, their CIA. A very powerful man in the country, and from my discussions with the State Department, he's gotten the message. He's indicated he'll cooperate, and I'm just reinforcing that message.
But when you say you're going to speak to him, I mean, asking him and having Pakistan say, yes, they'll cooperate, that is one thing. But can they deliver? Because I'm told that the man in charge of Pakistan, the military head of Pakistan, it's not certain that he can count on controlling his own intelligence agencies and perhaps even his military.
Well, the man I'm speaking to heads the intelligence agency, and he controls the intelligence agency. No one in our intelligence service or anyone else thinks he does not control it. If he's not the second most powerful man in Pakistan, he's the first most powerful man in Pakistan. Now, if you ask the question, can we be assured that they have the capacity to, quote, go get Osama bin Laden? No, we can't be assured of that. But can we know whether or not they're keeping the commitment if we end up needing anything from, if this occurs, anything from overflight capability to basing requirements, or if that turns out to be something we request? The answer to that is yes, they could know that.
Well, what do we want from Pakistan here?
It's
enough to say we want their cooperation, but what does that mean? Do we want to base troops there?
Well, I don't want to go into that now, but we have communicated what we may want to the Pakistanis, and in this case to the head of their intelligence service. And rather than telegraphing what we may want, I'm not at liberty to speak to that, but they know what we may want, and we expect that if in fact they expect a relationship with us, that we will, what we're asking for is reasonable.
Dan, you want to jump in with a question?
I do, Bob. Thank you very much. Senator, thanks for being with us.
Oh, I'm flattered you'd ask.
There's been talk about, our putting pressure on the Pakistanis and the Pakistan government in turn putting pressure on the Taliban. But what are the chances that in doing this, by in effect siding with the United States, that the government of Pakistan could once again fall? We are all aware of the fragility of governments in Pakistan.
Well, I don't want to be Pollyannish about this. That's possible. That is possible. But is a government that is taking a position that is in support of the Taliban, that is hiding Osama bin Laden, is that something that we care whether or not stands? To be very blunt about it. And what happens if they do not have our support? What happens if, they have a tough choice to make here. It's real simple. We have tens of thousands, potentially, Americans dead here. And it's a consequence of possibly a man who they have had a relationship with. And they've got to choose. They got to choose. Which side of the line are they on? This is a tough world. I sound callous. I don't mean to. But it's almost that stark and that simple. It will be difficult for them. It will be difficult for them to cooperate with us. They will be taking a chance, but I would suggest they're taking a larger chance not cooperating with us.
Sure. Senator, is there any chance that Iran can be brought into this coalition against terrorism, or is that just simply an impossibility?
I don't think, to be in this job, you've got to be an optimist. So I don't think anything's an impossibility, but I would not bank on any of that. I think, look, as you and I spoke last night, you were kind enough to ask me some questions last night. I believe very strongly that The administration, through Secretary Powell, is doing the exact right thing here now, building a coalition. And the coalition is a coalition of the willing and moderate states within the Arab world. Even though Iran is not an Arab world or Persian, it is in the neck of the woods that's pretty dangerous. I don't fully expect them to be able to succeed with regard to Iran, other than having Iran stand fast. So from my perspective, if they get cooperation from Russia, if we get cooperation from China, or at least accession from China, we have it from NATO now, and from key Arab states, then we are a long way along being able to make this a new day in the world for making sure that terrorist cells of this size, this complexity, this ability are not able to sustain themselves and exist.
I thought there was, I thought there was a rather significant statement made by Senator Lott and Senator Biden, not Senator Biden, Senator Daschle, after the joint meeting today. Senator Daschle came out and said, we're going to approve this $20 billion that the administration is asking for, but we understand this is a first installment. It sounds to me like that Congress is settled upon the fact that this is going to be a long-term deal.
It is going to be a long-term deal, but you remember now the $20 billion they were talking about was to rebuild New York City immediately, to deal with the immediate emergency, the aftermath of that. But I am confident, to the extent that the president focuses on the idea of dealing with terrorism and dealing with the homeland threats, he will get what he wants. Now, the only thing, and it's a debate down the road, Bob, as you know, if this gets confused with spending $500 billion for national missile defense, then everything kind of gets off kilter. But there is overwhelming unity here to give the president what we all believe is needed, and some of us have believed has been needed for some time. I don't mean to imply that this wouldn't have happened if we had done other things. But so, yes, there is a resolve. I mean, there's such a resolve here. The idea, think about, I mean, we all know this, but this is not comparable to anything that's happened in our history.
Okay. Senator, thank you very much. Dan?
Senator Biden, Bob Schieffer, thanks. We go now, joining us from our Washington Bureau, the former Air Force Chief of Staff, Ron Fogelman. Thank you very much for being with us. What are the president's options? I mean, we're talking about, well, we're definitely going to respond. It's going to be a big-time response. Maybe a lengthy response, but realistically, what are the options?
Well, Dan, I'm really not at liberty to talk about options. I think I'd rather talk a little bit about where we're at today and what's unfolding, if that would be okay.
That's fine.
Clearly, I think this whole idea of putting together a coalition is going to be something that's a longer-term operation. It will be something that will facilitate whatever military actions will come down the road, assuming that there will be military actions. The important thing, though, for the American public, I think, is to understand that their military services today are doing what you would expect them to do. They're ready. They're standing by for tasking, not only in the United States, but overseas. They're taking care of force protection. They're taking care of their families for those who have suffered losses. And as I said, they're standing by, looking for the tasking that they will ultimately have to execute.
Well, General, when the President and when the Secretary of Defense and others talk about a, quote, long campaign, I think people are entitled to get some idea of, by long campaign, we're talking about months, years, or do we not now know?
Quite frankly, I don't think we know, Dan. I think what we're talking about here, though, is a situation in which you mobilize those nations of the world, and as Senator Biden just said, people have to make a decision. They are either against terrorism or they're going to support it. For too long in this country, I think we've had a program, a philosophy that was counterterrorism. What we're talking about here is anti-terrorism.
And the difference between those two?
One is reactive. I think the other is a long-term program in which you deliberately set out to eliminate terrorism, to root it out at its sources, to also, though, as a result of mobilizing the other parts of your government, just beyond your military. You get your diplomatic functions, your economic, your political functions, and you build coalitions and you go after solving some of the fundamental and basic problems that lead to terrorism.
General, what is our military doing at this moment?
Today, We have combat air patrols that have been flying, quite frankly, over the major cities in the United States almost within minutes of the disaster. It's quite a success story, quite frankly, in the total force. We have Guard and Reserve aircraft that are airborne. We have active duty AWACS radar aircraft that are airborne. We have tanker aircraft that allow us to be doing this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We saw the Navy steam out of port. Their carriers are now in position, and their fighters are beginning to join this combat air patrol action. All these forces are under the command of the Commander-in-Chief of the North American Air Defense Command. You see the Navy through the Defense Office of Military Support, supporting the Army rather through the Defense Office of Military Support, out there supporting FEMA. We've had large deployments on the very first day of this of emergency medical personnel into forward staging areas close to New York. There's been a lot going on. There's a lot that's been going on in the air, a lot of surface movement. Your military has been engaged, as many have seen visibly, even here in Washington, D.C., the unusual scene of having Humvees on street corners. Your Guard forces activated to assist in maintaining security.
General, how long would it take the U.S. military to get to the point where it could salute the President and say, Mr. President, we are now at the strength we can carry out any mission that you give us?
Well, Dan, I think that's a function of what the mission is that's given. Clearly, as I said, our military is ready today, and there are actions that we could take, perhaps, but I don't think that that's the game plan. I think the game plan is to work on putting together the coalition, work on getting the facts. Who is it that's really behind this? Who are the people that have been supporting these terrorists, who have been harboring them, protecting them? And then once that's put together, I think you will see that your military will be prepared.
General, right near the end, I've had any number of people ask me, and I don't know the answer. We had a situation on Tuesday in which huge commercial airliners were diverting off their path, and the FAA knew this, yet one of them hit the Pentagon. Why weren't Air Force planes scrambled up to deal with that situation, or is it even practical to think that that could have been done?
Well, what's really interesting is over the past several years, as a result of the end of the Cold War, the focus of the aircraft that we have on alert has been air sovereignty. It's more focused towards the counter-drug operation than it has been the classic air defense. And so you found yourself in a position where, in collaboration with the FAA, these aircraft were never really declared hostile. Something's awry. We just are not, or we're not in a posture to be able to react to something internal to this country.
A posture policy that perhaps will have to change as a result of what happened this week?
I'm sure that policy is under review, and the very fact that you have forces today maintaining, as I said, F-15, F-16, and now F/A-18 combat air patrols over the major cities in this country is in fact a change in policy.
General Fogelman, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. We go now to Randall Pinkston live at Newark Airport, just across the Hudson in New Jersey. Randall?
Dan, as flight operations at airports resume, clearly the focus is also on security. CBS News just learned that about an hour and a half ago, at about 3:30 Eastern Time, Port Authority police detained 3 individuals in the departure area of American Airlines. We don't know why they were detained, but we do know that the police here were awaiting the arrival of FBI agents. We have also learned that the Port Authority, at the request of the State Department, detained a Saudi Arabian aircraft, a 747. Now, we saw several hours surrounded, but that plane was by Port Authority police, some 14 to 20 vehicles. We are told that a telex was received from the State Department requesting that the plane be placed on hold because it had been here past its authorization to stay. Now, exactly when that authorization expired, the officials here could not tell us. Of course, nothing was able to fly anyway since that multi-pronged attack this past Tuesday. But pursuant to that telex, officials surrounded the plane, and they also took the flight crew and the security crew into custody. We saw 4 people in handcuffs. Now, they are telling us that they were detained, that they were not arrested. We don't know their status now, but again, that was pursuant to requests from the U.S. State Department. The other story here today, of course, is the resumption of flight operations. For the most part, the focus has been on getting passengers who were diverted to other destinations this past Tuesday to their final destinations. So towards that end, Continental has been bringing in flights all afternoon, some of them from international points, crews and passengers who were supposed to have come here to New York this past Tuesday. There have been very few departures this afternoon. In fact, we are told not to expect any massive departures, regular departures for several days, if not weeks, as they put the focus on getting people to their original destinations, getting planes ready to go back into service, and of course changing all of the security procedures at airports around the nation. No more backside check-in, different parking rules will be in effect, different carry-on rules will be in effect, absolutely no knives, Swiss Army knives, utility knives of any sort, heightened security at every American airport for understandable reasons. Dan?
Randall Pinkston live at Newark Airport. I want to tick off for you, and we'll put a graphic up to tell you what the new airport security measures include. Before being allowed to reopen, airports must clear their terminals of people and conduct thorough searches. That's one reason a lot of airports are not open yet. The complete ban on curbside check-in, forget it, isn't going to happen. All passengers must present tickets, boarding passes, and government-issued photo ID, driver's license, passport, military ID, at security checkpoints. Keep in mind, you must present a ticket and boarding pass then. Passengers should check in 2 hours ahead of time for domestic flights. And they mean it, folks, 2 hours ahead of time, even for domestic flights. Passengers with electronic tickets will have to get boarding passes before they go through security screening. At some airports, bomb blast barriers, that is concrete barriers, have been and are being erected in parking lots. These are to protect the public from some bomb blasts. Behind the scenes, there will be sweeps and security checks of airport workers. Now, that's some of what you can expect. Ed Bradley, we've had some confusion about foreign carriers, whether they're allowed to come in, go out. You have some information to square that away
We talked to the
us.
FAA in Washington, and they say it is the policy that they are not permitting foreign carriers to come into the United States. They say they do know of the 2 Alitalia flights that were this morning, one to Los Angeles and one to San Francisco. They say that those were exceptions, but they're not in a position to say what caused that exception.
So foreign carriers can go out, but they can't come in?
Foreign carriers are permitted to leave the United States to go back wherever they came from. British Airways to London, Air France to Paris. But foreign carriers cannot come into the United States. U.S. carriers can come and go.
Thanks, Ed. We also want to clear up something. We've tried to be as factual as we can. There's been some confusion, communication confusion between rescue workers, police, news organizations, including this one, on the number of firefighters known to have been rescued alive today. We started the morning with 2 firefighters who walked out after having been found alive in the rubble. One was in better shape than the other, but they both were in remarkably good shape. Now, after that, there began to be some confusion, and it was believed, reported, supposed, and alleged that 5 firefighters had been found in an SUV covered with rubble. We're now told on what we consider to be authoritative sources, and going back and checking that story, and keep in mind we try very hard to check, recheck, and then go back and check another time, and in rechecking, the situation appears to be 2 firefighters confirmed, found alive in the debris and rubble today. If there have been any others, we are not able to absolutely, completely confirm them. And as for the story of some firefighters found alive in an SUV and some rubble, that story right now is in such a confused state in trying to sort fact from rumor that we're going to have to put it off to the side under the "we are now skeptical, it may or may not be true." So the headline now must go, confirmed, 2 firefighters found alive today. If there have been any others, we are not in a position to say absolutely that's true. Now let's go to Mika Brzezinski with more on the situation downtown. Mika.
Yeah, Dan, the wind has changed here and the air has changed as it, and so it's getting really bad here. I just want to add to your clarification, information we're getting from the Mayor's Office of Emergency Management confirming that the 6 people who were rescued earlier today, as you point out, were people who became missing, who became trapped earlier today. They were part of the rescue effort. So what we called the miracle and the madness is really just a horrible part of this story. People here trying to save people and becoming a part of the disaster themselves. So hope really is diminishing here in terms of the luck for any survivors who might have it here. Let me talk to you about some video we have, amateur video. I believe we're going to go first. I don't know if you can hear me here. We got a lot of activity here on the West Side Highway. We've got some firemen here who've rescued themselves. They're coming out of the disaster zone. They somehow got caught in there themselves. This is amateur video you're looking at. You know, this is a big moment for these guys. They've lost their buddies. They've lost hundreds of their buddies, several hundred. And to find each other, Dan, is truly a miracle. We've seen the disaster. We're seeing what hell is happening down there, and to see pictures like this, to see a reunion, to see people who know each other, finding each other again, is truly moving and heartwarming and a sign of real hope here amidst what really is a scene of hell. Speaking of hell, we also have video of body bags coming out of the disaster zone. This is also what's happening here today. The mayor of New York has ordered 6,000 body bags, and all indications are that he's going to need more. It is a horrible scene here because not only is there the devastation and the sadness and the loss seeing the body bags come out, but there's also this feeling of unease, of wondering if a building might just fall down, wondering if investigators and structural engineers haven't gotten to these buildings here yet, and maybe they're at risk as well. We've had situations where we've been down near the site, but maybe 10, 12 blocks back, and those sites have been evacuated, 10-story buildings. All of a sudden, officials coming in, having taken a look at what they've got there, saying, get out. This building could go down at any moment. So there's a lot of fear here, a lot of unease, and it's a sense that not only are perhaps these buildings at risk, but wondering if this situation will ever change, if we'll ever feel safe again. In a sense, it's that feeling of on edge that we don't know when it will go away, because there's so many unanswered questions and so many issues as to what might happen after this. But this zone here has a lot of different emotions coming in and out. People finding each other, people looking for someone desperately, anyone looking for friends, knowing many people who were in there. And then, of course, clarifications like the one we had, where we had people who were inside. We thought maybe there was a miracle, and instead, just part of the chaos, Dan. Just part of people trying to help and getting caught up in it 2 days later.
Mika Brzezinski in Lower Manhattan. And let me point out that neither she nor any other CBS News correspondent or reporter, they don't wear these masks for effect. When you're on the ground there, the air is thick with, and I mean, I use that word in aptly. The air is thick with all kinds of debris, including some asbestos, because there was asbestos in those buildings. And everybody not only is advised to wear one of those masks, but in most cases you simply have to do it to really keep your breathing clear. And the rescue workers themselves, including the firemen, policemen, the nurses, the doctors, the construction workers, the iron workers, all of those people, some of them wear them, some don't, and it depends on part of the day. But the air is especially heavy just now. And this is true over much of the island of Manhattan. Clearly the air is heaviest down in the lower part of the island, where the disaster, the heart of the disaster, but virtually all over the island of Manhattan, to one degree or another, you can literally smell it, you can feel it when you breathe, when you are outside. Let's go back to Bill Plant at the White House. Bill?
Dan, as we mentioned a little while ago, there is increased security around the White House this afternoon. The Secret Service has expanded the perimeter across the street to the other side of Lafayette Park. That's where they put us on Tuesday when they thought that there was imminent danger to the building. Secret Service doesn't say why. They simply say that from time to time there's going to be heightened security under the current situation. And all the White House will say is that all appropriate precautions are being taken. Some other business this afternoon. The president has met with lawmakers from Congress, from the Washington, D.C. area and the New York area, the people whose constituents are affected by this tragedy. That meeting is over, and those members are out now talking about what I'm sure was the support that they received from the president for what they will do for themselves and their constituents in the way of emergency relief funds. Another bit of business that is perhaps unpleasant to mention, but very necessary. The bodies of the dead being taken from the Pentagon site are being transported this afternoon to the nation's only military mortuary at Dover, Delaware. Dover, of course, is the place where so many of the tragedies from overseas, the bodies have been brought back, they're prepared there, they're identified there, forensic work is done. It's unpleasant to think about it, but of course it is very essential for certainly for the peace of mind of the survivors. So the White House, Dan, continues trying to keep orchestrating a number of things on all fronts. We had another long series of briefings today from all of the relevant agencies, from the Attorney General, from the Secretary of State, from the Defense Department, as you know. And policy is being made as we go along here. You heard the strong statement from the Deputy Secretary of Defense today. It's quite clear that the president's contacts with foreign leaders are being pointedly fashioned by all the people around here into an ability to say that we're getting support for what the president wants to do, building a coalition for whatever action he eventually decides to take. And tomorrow, as you know, Dan, the president will visit New York City. His spokesman says that they've been assured by the mayor and the governor of New York that Mr. Bush's presence will not disrupt the ongoing emergency rescue and clearance operations. Dan?
Bill Plant live at the White House. Jim Stewart has moved into his seat in our bureau after working the phones and doing legwork about the investigation. Jim, update us on the efforts to find out who did this and to bring him to justice.
Dan, I'm not quite sure how the FBI has managed to pull this off, but we're told that in about 2 hours, we're going to see the photographs of all of, most, or if not all, of the 18 men who hijacked the 4 aircraft on Tuesday, as well as their identification. Apparently, some of these photographs, as you might imagine, are going to be quite fuzzy and distorted. I get the impression some of them might have come from surveillance cameras overhead at the airports at Logan and Dulles International Airport, where they seized the aircraft after they took off. Others may have come, we're told, from driver's licenses, because some of these men we know now had lived in the United States for more than a year. These are the 18 individuals that they believe were aboard the planes. The search today continues for people who have been associated with them, and we must tell you right now, some of those people, it appears, have commercial pilot's licenses, and they are unaccounted for. In other news around the country today, the FBI, as we've seen, have been conducting numerous searches and sweeps and picking up people, but I caution you again, these are not arrests that are directly related to the attacks. These are people that they simply thought might have information, and then when they put their names through the INS computer, well, up pops the name, and they are now being held on some sort of violation for being in the country illegally or other questioning. That is the only new thing that has come up today, except for one rather bizarre end note, and that is that apparently one of the hijackers did leave what sounds like a suicide note, but another official tells me was more along the nature of a musing, if you will, about the end of life and other items that were not disclosed in detail. It sounded, though, this official said, certainly not like a note written by a man who thought he was going to be around for a while. Dan?
Jim Stewart, I want to underscore what you just said, that we expect to have sometime today from the FBI
yes,
pictures
Dan,
of each and every one of the 18 hijackers who were aboard those planes?
Dan, we're told in approximately 2 hours, the Justice Department hopes to have the identification, certainly, and now I'm just told, confirmed, they're going to have every one of the photographs. Now, I don't know how they pulled this off, but they've got them.
Well, and when they show them to the world, you will see them on our CBS News continuing coverage of Attack on America. just wanted to underscore, I wasn't sure I heard what Jim Stewart had said, to tell you the truth, because it would be a pretty amazing piece of police work. Keep in mind that while the FBI heads up the investigation, that individual law enforcement agencies all over the country, and including many around the world, but local police departments, state law enforcement operators, everybody, is helping the FBI. So it isn't just the FBI doing this, although one cannot heap enough praise on the FBI if indeed, since it appears, they now have the photographs of each and every one of the 18 hijackers who aboard the planes. Now, Attorney General Ashcroft said earlier that there were 5 hijackers on 2 planes and 4 hijackers on each of the 2 others, and on each aircraft there was at least one hijacker who had been trained to fly in this country. Every time you say it, you just mentally put an exclamation point behind it, but those are the facts as laid out by the Attorney General this morning. Now, he also said that there was, I think he used the word considerable or extensive number of people in support of those who actually went up and were suicide hijack murderers in the planes. And I believe the figure of about 10, at least 10 of those, were thought to still be at large in the United States, and so some of what the FBI and others are doing is trying to find those 10 people, as well as find out where the tentacles go back, into what countries overseas had some roots tied to these various people, some of whom we expect to see pictures of them within 2 hours. Ed Bradley, anything you want to update us on there?
2 things, Dan. The firemen, and these reports have been going back and forth. It turns out that these are not firemen who were trapped in there when the building came down originally. That 2 or 3 who were rescued today were firemen who were lost today when part of the building came down. So they haven't been in there since Tuesday. The other thing is that we saw the
They were in the rubble, but it was rubble, more recent rubble.
More recent rubble that came today. We also saw the pictures of the Pentagon, with that gaping hole in the Pentagon. That is where the transponder is. But they know where it's located, where the signal's coming from.
Maybe
but
we can get that photograph up while you talk here.
Yeah, they can't go in and get it because that area is so unstable. What they're trying to do now is to put 7 columns in that gaping hole against the wall that you saw, so that they can then determine if it's safe enough to go in there and look at it. They'll be trying to put those columns in tonight. If they get those in, then they can go in after the transponder. One other thing about the FAA and that exception, the flight from Canada. It was an Alitalia flight that was originally headed for Oakland and was diverted to Canada. Therefore, the exception is that it was a diverted flight, therefore it can return to its original destination.
Ed, I want to apologize. I had no intention to interrupt you. I was simply trying to get our control room, maybe to put up that picture of the Pentagon. The area where the sound from the transponder of the plane that hit the Pentagon, we now have the picture back up. In this V of rubble, if you will, somewhere back there, Ed, is where they now believe that black box, if you will,
and this is where they've got to put those columns up to support those walls.
In order to get
in there, because they can't send someone in there and have it come tumbling down on top of them.
But the good news is that they've picked up the sounds of what they believe are sounds coming from the black box, and that would be a big get, because as Bob Orr pointed out earlier, if they actually get the full black box, the recording of data from the cockpit of the plane, and particularly if they got the voice box. Mind you, it's my understanding that most of these airliners, and Bob Orr explained this, that you have, one set of equipment, if you will, electronics, that registers what the plane is doing, when and where, and then you have a voice recorder. Now, of course, the significance of the voice recorder, if that turns out to be recovered in the Pentagon rubble or anywhere else, that would tell us a great deal about how the skyjackers managed to get control of these aircraft and perform these deadly suicide acts. Among the other headlines of the afternoon, the second ranking person at the Defense Department has laid out what he said will be eventually a sustained U.S. military effort to wipe out terrorism. Didn't say when it was going to begin or how it was going to begin, but underscored that the country should be preparing itself, because the government is preparing itself for a sustained military move against terrorism. President Bush described it as the the First World War of the new century, the war against terrorism. Now, our CBS News coverage of all of these events will be going on through the afternoon and evening. I want to remind you that we'll have full coverage on tonight's CBS Evening News. We'll make a real effort on the evening news each night now to bring you up to date, not just bring you up to date with the most important developments, but also to add as much context and perspective as we possibly can. Now, Ed, we've had in the Joe Biden interview, Senator Biden made it pretty clear that, yes, the United States is pressuring the government of Pakistan to do what they can to join in the coalition to pressure the Taliban, but he straightforwardly said, yeah, that could be of some danger to the government of Pakistan because the Taliban might squeeze back, but he said, so be it, that's the kind of situation we're in.
He did, but he also, the question he didn't answer is, what do we do if they don't cooperate?
Our CBS News continuing coverage of the attack on America is what you are watching.
This is a special edition.